something beside me, a light to the kerosene, and the places aren't real anymore, and the faces don't say anything, in the silent light of the mind-blown sphere. It's a game, Devil's Chess Club, Devil's Chess Club.
And yet the person they would use would be this dude. It's just, that part seems strange to me. So that's where it seems like, well, you know, he could have been a lone nut, or he could have been there as a patsy. Now, this other issue of this is where I want to get into something besides the assassination today, and it's really about Trump himself, which is, how much is he the anti-neocon person? I mean, the neocons on the surface really hate him. Bill Kristol talks about how terrible he is and how he'd prefer the deep state to Trump. But then he puts people like John Bolton in high positions. He destroys the Iran deal, and he moves the capital to Jerusalem, or he moves the U.S. embassy to Jerusalem. I mean, this was a move that no other U.S. presidents wanted to do. It's difficult to know exactly what to make of him, but I don't think that he's pure full on the anti-neocon person. Now, here's an article on Trump and Adelson. Okay, she commits more than $100 million to Trump's campaign. This was written in late May over at The Forward, which is a Jewish publication. And this is, here's what they say about it. In a recent profile in New York Magazine, Adelson suggested that she might want Trump to push for the annexation of the occupied West Bank if he wins his second term, described in the piece as unfinished Israel business from Trump's presidency. Now, when I think of the neocons, I really think of them as being, I've come to believe that despite the domestic, warmonger part of it and so on, that it has been animated in large part by a devotion to Greater Israel, the concept of Greater Israel. I think that before October 7, I knew that this was kind of the general direction that the Zionists were going for, and that they weren't interested in an actual Palestinian state, that they'd backed Hamas specifically to prevent that from happening. I think that I actually underestimated until October 7 and the response to it, the degree to which that was a prime directive, a commandment of sorts to this political formation of the neoconservatives. And then once you understand, then you go back and look at a lot of these things that have happened, you see where that seems to track. So now, if Trump is really somebody that could be used to advance the crazier parts of the neocon, agenda, especially the top part of like creating Greater Israel and kneecapping the rest of the region, then what do we make of Trump and this kind of a thing? Is he really the enemy of the neocons?
I think that the Biden administration represents two tendencies within the far right imperialist, right? The Ukraine business and the Gaza business, they don't seem to have the same people pushing for them, except within the administration. But like if we look at all these think tanks and these centers of political ideology, they seem to be pushing on different ends. Like the Trump will almost certainly be more vicious than Biden on Israel, and everyone understands this. I mean, I think during the debate, Trump was like, "No, the reason we don't have a peaceful settlement in Gaza is because Israel doesn't want one, and we should let them keep going, and we should let them go crazy." Like the Biden administration, for its part, even though it's hamstrung by the overriding political reality of Zionism in America, so they can't cut aid. But they do seem to be.
People like Blinken are straight up devoted to it, though. Blinken is not like, oh, my arm is being twisted. I mean, from my understanding, Blinken is the power of the lobby over is manifest in the fact that he puts Blinken in that position in the first place.
That's true. But at least in
But
their actions,
that doesn't conflict with what you're saying. It just sort of
yeah. Yeah,
makes it even
their
more
actions. I mean, like
clear.
they've been pushing for a peace settlement. I mean, they sent Bill Burns there to like try and like negotiate in Doha and like in Qatar. So like Hamas and Israel,
Yeah.
it's Israel's the people who are like very against it.
I
But
do
the
think that
Americans,
the Biden administration does recognize that this is not to their advantage, but
because they don't want a
it's
bigger war. They don't want a
yeah.
bigger war in the Middle East, which is something that at least it would appear that neocons, the at least of the Bush era neocons, that would be something that they would be pushing for. But on Ukraine, which is a separate issue, which is truly about like the actual empire, right? Like Israel could get like they could everyone in Israel could like pack up and move to Poland, and that wouldn't change much of the great power competition in the world. But this Ukraine business does, and I think there are a major faction of people who are committed to using Ukraine to bleed Russia as much as possible because they're seeing this new multipolar world. While the Zionists are focused on their stupid Israel project, there are people who are thinking about the big issues like Ukraine. And on Ukraine, Trump does not appear to be on board in any capacity. He doesn't seem to have any special care for what happens, whether or not Russia takes Ukraine, whether or not Ukraine fights back or whatever. He doesn't care. He was very critical of NATO, and I think his instinct is still to be critical of NATO. So I think that there are two tendencies, right? The Biden tendency to push for Ukraine and push for Israel. The people pushing for those things might not have the same interest as Trump. The Israel people might, but I mean they are overriding and super powerful, but they're not the only game in town when it comes to like political forces in the country.
No, well, it's difficult. I don't feel that I have a total grasp on what Trump really plans to do to revise the
one more
situation.
thing. I will say that there is, given the fact that there is more coverage critical of Israel in the mainstream lately, that also indicates that there is a segment of the overriding political authority that is less devoted to Zionism than some of the more crazy.
That's been the case. I mean, that's when I think back of like Brzezinski, talking in front of Congress in like 06, 07, saying there's going to be a terrorist attack. It's going to be blamed on Iran, and they're going to use it to start a war that'll be disastrous for the region and for the United States. That's like them pushing back on it. Or Reagan at the end of his presidency, and he wants to recognize the PLO and say that acknowledge that they have stopped supporting terrorism. And then on the neocon, super Zionist side, they're like, no, they're still terrorists. They're still terrorists. And you're thinking like, why are you so invested in accusing these people of terrorism when they're denying that they do it? And the terrorist acts really only make sense politically if they are claimed by the group that does them for X, Y, and Z reasons. Why are they so obsessed with saying that the PLO is still practicing terrorism? And the reason is because they don't want any partner that they can negotiate. They want to be able to say we can't negotiate with them because they're terrorists. And the reason they want to be able to say that is because they really want to just keep expanding settlements and taking more and more of the land, changing the facts on the ground so that eventually it's a fait accompli that they've got their greater Israel. So, but people in the U.S. have realized that that wasn't the right thing to do, people that had the national interest in mind. But for whatever reason, the Zionist side, the neocon side, is able to get a critical mass of control over the command of U.S. foreign policy especially in the aftermath of George H.W. Bush's election. Probably is what led to George H.W.'s defeat. Whether Bill Clinton was really their man or not, the important thing was defeating Bush, because Bush was a person who was interested in a two-state solution. He saw it as being in the U.S. national interest, and he represented the old Eastern establishment CFR crowd that really wasn't as pro-Israel. Didn't put Israel at the center of everything, whereas this greater Israel concept is something they're obsessed with. So the neocons need the neocon like intelligentsia, like Crystal and the PNAC crowd. They recognize that Ukraine and the Middle East situation are related, because the way that they get greater Israel is by having a situation where the U.S. and Israel together, where the West is the White Power League, with headquarters in London, Tel Aviv, and Washington, and on Wall Street, that these are the dominant forces in the world that are unassailable. And so Russia, making sure Russia is weak, and it doesn't build on its alliances with places like Syria or Iraq or Iran or other countries that it's allied with at present or at different times. That's their obsession. And so for, I think, the neocon intelligentsia, they see these as related. Perhaps Trump is so corruptible and answerable to money that people like Adelson recognize that they can move him on particular issues, which are really the only things that they care about. And so it's 6 on one hand, heads they win, tails they don't lose. Like they either get Biden, who they own, he's like the IPAC guy. Ultimately, he might make noises one way or another about, hey, don't go into Rafah or I'll have to stop giving you bombs. And then like they go into Rafah and he's like, well, I'm giving you slightly smaller bombs to blow up children with now, right? So maybe you see that Biden's not doing much about them, but he's more on board with the full-on neocon PNAC, Project for a New American Century, including NATO and kneecapping Russia. Trump, for whatever reason, seems that he may have some inclination towards peace with coming to a understanding with Russia, maybe deluded enough to think that they can pull Russia away from China. So maybe the neocons despise him for that, or maybe part of it is that this is a way for the neocons to almost launder their reputation, because look at Trump, look at them, don't look at us. Don't think about the Iraq war, don't think about torture, don't think about the Palestinian, the genocide in Gaza. Think about the orange man and how scary he is and how bad he is for democracy and how he doesn't have good manners about, different minority groups in the United States. It's terrible, terrible.
Yeah. So, we were talking earlier about whether or not we would have the time to get into the next thing.
Yeah, that's going to be too much.
Maybe we could
save
that out.
We will save that out. There's only one more thing I have here, so let me move on. Do you have anything else you want to say about Adelson? We'll skip that. We'll just talk about the Vance thing, and then that'll be that.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's just...
Hold on, just pause for 1 second. Pause for 1 second and say anything else you want to say about this Trump business and the difference between the Trump and Biden.
Oh, well, at least as far as the difference between Trump and Biden goes, it's really no effect on Israel. Like for us, the people who want to see Israel, end its occupation, end its apartheid, end the genocide, both of them are going to support it, no matter what. So if you're like a rational, sober Israel supporter, and you're like one of those two guys who are rational, sober Israel supporters, then you really don't have any difference of opinion about Trump or Biden. But if you're a fanatic who will accept nothing less than, accept Israel's demands, all of them, 100%, no matter what, well, then, yeah, you're going to like Trump more. You're going to be like, yeah, Trump's our guy. He put his hands on the orb, Abraham Accords, moving the embassy, et cetera, et cetera. He's very easy to push. And he's been in the New York milieu for quite some time. And so a lot of the Zionists out of New York have a direct line to him.
Right. Yeah, and I would just add to that the ironic thing about all of this is that I don't think that any of these people that Trump or Biden are friends to Israel in the most meaningful sense, because this greater Israel business is really, it's a genocidal, blood and soil fascism, and it is ultimately going to, I think it's more likely to destroy the project and the whole Zionist project to begin with. That in retrospect, they should have found a way to have a workable two-state solution and then hope for the best. And then probably the kind of absurdity of this, of the whole situation of like, we are the state of the chosen people. Like any state like that to me is not something that should exist in the 20th or 21st century. The Jim Crow regime was you just cannot have a place where you have a master group of people that has special privileges. And the argument that like, oh, so Jews, I've literally heard Zionists make the argument that you're saying that Jews alone can't have a state. Like that's actually how they frame it, which is insane, when the reality is that like nobody else supports apartheid or ethno states or states with a master race or anything like that. Like they're trying to say that to deny Israel is to be, to make Israel some sort of exception to the rule because you're anti-Semitic and you discriminate. When in reality, it's the outlier. It's the one thinking that it alone can have this kind of a thing. It's pretty astounding. But the ironic thing is, as I say, I think it's more likely to burn out this project than to help it. So the metaphor is really Zionism is collectively like America's drunk friend who is near blackout drunk, yet somehow still standing and has taken the keys to the car and is going to try to drive home. And nobody has the wherewithal. And nobody has, and America, instead of, taking the keys away, is like giving them some nitro for the gas tank. I mean, it is. This is insane. They're really, Larry Wilkerson and other people are saying they don't think that this state will exist. If they attack Hezbollah, I think they will get their asses kicked.
They're absolutely cooked, and their generals know it. The generals. The thing in Israel is that all the generals know that they can't beat Hamas, that they can't beat Hezbollah. Even the Mossad is starting to come out. The head of the Mossad is coming out and saying, Netanyahu is throwing a wrench in this whole negotiation thing. Like, coming out, they seem to want to stop the war. The intelligence people want to stop the war. It's only this fanatical political front that is pushing for this war. The Bezalel Smotriches, the Itmar Ben-Gvirs, the true blood and soil settlers. They seem to be the driving force behind this. So I think the most likely outcomes are some sort of political military coup in Israel to get out the lunatics and to marginalize them, or the dismantling of the Zionist state.
I mean, if they do walk this back, though, I do not understand. I don't see how, with the events unfolding as they will, that Israel will be able to easily survive, because the north is in chaos, and Gaza, once this settles down and there's able to be some kind of reconstruction, I don't think that the world is going to. There's no pretense of like the Abraham Accords going forward anymore. I don't think that they're going to be able to go back to the status quo. I think they might be thinking that they want to go back to the status quo. I don't see that as being easily accomplished. The defeat in Ukraine is going to happen, and it's going to be a spectacular reckoning for the U.S. and NATO, and that will further weaken the U.S. position. Russia and China may decide that these people are so crazy that in order to prevent them from starting a new war, they're going to arm Iran to the teeth. They're going to support the Houthis. They're going to encourage Iran to support Hezbollah. They might put air defense and so on into Syria. I mean, Russia has been turned into a military superpower.
If China wants to do something about Israel, China has still maintained like full trade relations with Israel, but they don't care. But if they wanted to, they have the power to really crush Israel economically. If they want to implement sanctions, like if Israel's cooked now, then I guess this is the last thing I'll say because I do have to hop off. But if Israel's cooked now, if China and Russia were to say, all right, Israel, chill, and mean it, and then back it up with action, then it's over.
I'm not sure that they would listen. But let's look at the one last thing here about Trump and all of this, which is just something that we should just mention, at least in passing. The Trump's running mate, JD Vance, I don't like this person at all. My whole family is from West Virginia, and I think that his caricature of people who grow up in that part of the world is mean-spirited, and I just find this guy to be kind of a terrible human being. I think that there's a certain kind of chauvinism and arrogance in the way that he would characterize these people. I think I'm not a fan of this person for almost personal reasons, because I said, my whole family is from the hills of West Virginia, and that's a place where the problems that you see with the people that live there are a function of the role that part of the country has played in American capitalism. It's sort of an internal colony of sorts. And it's strange when you look back at the way that these people have been caricatured. They're kind of not considered exactly white in a particular way. And there's even a kind of like hillbilly minstrelsy you see in the culture in certain ways that's just strange. It's a strange dynamic, and I'm not a fan of this guy who's kind of like exploited that in different ways. So but just trying to get a bead on what he says here, which my opinion was, this guy was like, I'm a never Trumper, and now he's Trump's vice president. And you can also look here a few years ago, no, this wasn't that long ago. This is back in January. He was saying JD Vance says Republicans calling to strike Iran are living in the past. So here he says this, interesting. Now, more recently, reported by Jewish Insider, Vance on Iran, if you're going to punch the Iranians, you punch them hard. Okay? So he praised Trump's decision to assassinate Qasem Soleimani. So what this says to me is this guy is just a supreme opportunist, and I wouldn't, his economic populism or anything else, I wouldn't trust that very far at all. I think he just is a total opportunist, and he will say what he deems it expedient to say. Any opinions on Vance?
I have a lot to say on Vance, but long story short, fake populist, dangerous, hack. Well, end of story. Full stop.
Yeah.
But I got to go hop onto this other interview. But,
very good. Bryce Green, until next time, thank you very much.
All right. Peace.
Thanks to Dana Chavarria for producing this episode, and thank you for tuning in. Special thanks to Four Died Trying for supporting the Devil's Chess Club. Visit fourdiedtrying.com for details. I urge everyone watching this to subscribe to the American Exception podcast on Patreon for the best coverage of the deep politics of the U.S. empire. This month, we have episodes from our series on the global drug metagroup, a milieu that appears to have staged the 1999 Moscow apartment buildings. There's also much reason to suspect that some of these networks were also deeply involved in the American 9/11 a couple years later. The story is laid out on the American Exception podcast on Patreon. This month, we also have new material from our oral history series with the inventor of parapolitics and the deep politics approach, Professor Peter Dale Scott. I'm not impartial, since American Exception is my podcast, but I don't think anybody else is putting out material like this. What to make of recent events? I do wonder what Trump's assassination portends. We could speculate that the U.S. regime or deep state really does not want Trump back in office. Perhaps that is what the shooting was about. If that is the case, and if Trump's victory seems inevitable, we could see something crazy and unprecedented which would provide a pretext for canceling the elections. Let's hope that this is just some paranoia here and that there's not a huge structural deep event on the horizon. But it has to be noted that more and more people are thinking that, rather than stoically accept defeat, our oligarch devils would rather knock over their own chessboard.